We're on 8.02 notes for Algebra 2. These are, given the graphs, I want you to write equations for sine and cosine today. Before we look at the graphs, though, we're going to just give you some information, and I want you to figure out the equation for sine and cosine. For number 1, find the equation in y equals a sine bx form. Assume that a is greater than 0, so your amplitude is bigger than 0. B is also greater than 0. The amplitude is 3, and the period is 8 pi. So far, what I know is I know that A is my amplitude is 3, so that's 3 sine bx. So now I need to figure out what the b value is in order to find this equation. So I've used my amplitude, I've given the period. So I know that the formula for the period of a sine or cosine curve is equal to 2 pi over b. So what I'm going to do is substitute in our period, and we're going to solve for b, since the period formula has a b in it, and that's what I'm looking for. So my period is 8 pi, so I'm going to put that in for period. So 8 pi equals 2 pi over b. Now I'm just going to put my 8 pi over 1, and now I can cross multiply and solve for b. So now I have 8 times pi times b equals 2 pi times 1, or just 2 pi. To solve for b, I'm going to divide both sides by 8 pi. These cancel, the pi's cancel, and 2 over 8 reduces to 1/4. So now I have y equals, and a was greater than 0, so that was a positive 3 over here. So positive 3 sine, and for b, I'm going to put 1/4 x. And remember, we talked about last time, x over 4 is the same thing as 1/4 x. So you could write that either way. So I could also write it as 3 sine x over 4. Either way is the same thing. All right, for number 2, very similar problem to what we just did. I want you guys to give it a try. Be careful on this one, though, because a here is less than 0. And this time our period doesn't have a pi in it. So go ahead and see if you can find your a and your b for this one. All right, so we've got a is cosine bx. So far, I know that y is equal to, this time a is less than 0. So that means my amplitude is, my a value is going to be negative. So that's negative 2 cosine bx. Okay, step 2. I need to now find b. So to find b, I'm going to use my formula for the period because that has a b in it. So period equals 2 pi over b. Now I know the period is 4, so I'm going to put a 4 in for my period and set it equal to 2 pi over b. Put it over 1, cross multiply. So I get 4 times b equals 2 pi times 1, or just 2 pi. Divide by 4, and b is equal to 1/2 pi, or pi over 2. So now for my final equation, I have y equals negative 2 cosine pi over 2x. And you could put that in parentheses there, or again, you could write it as pi x over 2. Either way is fine. Okay, and those are our equations given the amplitude and the period. Now we're going to look at a graph and figure out what its equation is. So here you might want to grab a highlighter or a colored pen or pencil to help you just trace the midline and make it pop. But before we do that, let's just go over here what we're going to be doing for each of these. So letter A, first determine if it's sine or cosine. And to do that, you're going to figure out where it falls on the y-axis. So if it starts on the midline at the y-axis, it's sine. And if it starts above or below the midline, it's going to be cosine. And we're focusing that on the y-axis is where we're going to decide it, because these graphs can be shifted left to right. And remember our two general forms here, a sine bx plus c, and y equals a cosine bx plus c. Our amplitude, which again is the distance between the middle of the curve to the top of the curve is maximum minus minimum over 2. The b value, it comes from your period formula like we just did, so 2 pi over b, that's where you're going to find your b. And in order to do these, you really need to know what period is. So it's the length for one cycle. You need to know that one cycle of sine is that s, sideways s, and the cosine is the u, or the rotated c. And then be able to find C, the midline. So a lot of these things, especially like A and C, you can find those by just looking at your graph, but we also have these formulas too that we're gonna practice using and then verify these answers on our graph. So to find the midline, you're taking the average of your maximum and minimum, so adding them and dividing by 2. Notice these two formulas are quite similar, but amplitude you're subtracting, midline you're adding, because the midline is actually the middle of the graph. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is draw a line through the center of your curve to tell if it's sine or cosine. And here's where I want you to look at the y-axis when you decide. Also remember, sine starts at the midline. So sine is like this, and cosine starts above or below. All right, so I take my color, I'm gonna use pink here. I see the top is here at 2, the bottom's at -2, so I can see that my middle of the curve is right here on the x-axis. So now when I look at the y-axis right here, I see that my graph starts at the midline, which means this must be sine. So I know that my equation is going to be y equals a sine bx plus c. All right, that's just deciding if it's sine or cosine. Step 2, find your a. So now we're going to find our a, b, and c. So find a first. So that's our amplitude. So our formula for the amplitude written above is your max minus your min over 2. All right, so let's take A as our amplitude. Our maximum value here, the highest point we ever reach is 2 for your y values. And the lowest point we ever reach is -2. So that's minus -2. Make sure you have that double negative in there over 2. 2 plus 2 is 4, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now, since you want to just verify here that we start by going up, which means it's going to be a positive A. So we know it's going to have a positive 2. All right, next up, step 3. We found A, now we're going to find B. Go right in alphabetical order. So our formula with a B in it is our period formula. So the period equals 2 pi over B. Now remember, it takes, the period represents how long it takes to complete one full cycle. So now we've decided that this is sine. So we need a full cycle of sine. So if I start tracing at 0 here, I go up. Is that a full cycle of sine? No. It's how much of a cycle? It looks like it's only half because you only have the top part. You still need to go below and then back up again. So if half of it goes to 2 pi, then your full curve is going to go to 4 pi. And here you can see back up here. So this goes from -2 pi all the way to 2 pi, and that's one full cycle. So -2 pi to 0 is a length of 2 pi, and then 0 to 2 pi is another 2 pi, giving you 4 pi. So now I set my period equal to the formula for the period, which is 2 pi over b. Cross multiply like we did in those first two problems. and we get 4 pi times b equals 2 pi. Divide both sides by that 4 pi to solve for b. And we can reduce to get b is 1/2. Okay, so now I found b. Next, I found A, I found B. Now I need to find C. So find C, that's my midline. And to find our midline, we're going to take our maximum plus our minimum. We're finding the average over 2. So here we're taking our maximum, which again was 2. Our minimum was -2, which is 0 over 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0. So we know that C is equal to 0. And then lastly, actually before we go on to the equation, I just want to point out how to find A and C on your graph. So right here, to find A, you would look for the distance from the center of your curve to the top. So that's 1, 2, well, actually I have to use this scale. So this is 1 box, 1 unit, and then 2 units. So that goes up by 2s. So that's also why it's sometimes easy to use your formula, and important to use your formula as a double check, because we don't always count by single boxes. So that's 2 units, and we got our A to be 2. C is our midline, which we already drew in. So we already knew that that was the equation, y equals 0, which means our C must be 0. So we're just using the equations to practice using them, but also to verify our graph. And then lastly, your equation, we're just substituting everything in. So y equals A, which is +2, sine B, which is 1/2 x. So the equation for this graph is 2 sine 1/2 x. Let's try another one. All right, so first step, draw your line through the middle of the curve. So this is -3, this is +3. So my midline is going to go right at that x-axis again. Now let's look at where it starts. So we're looking at the y-axis. Does the graph start at the orange line, at the midline? No, it does not. It doesn't start till down here. So it starts below the midline. So that actually tells us 2 different things. Number 1, it tells us that it's cosine because it starts at or below or above the midline, and that it's going to have a -a because it starts below the midline. So we know we're going to have a negative cosine because it starts below the midline at the y-axis. So far we know it's going to be y equals -a cosine bx plus c. Step 2, now we're going to find our A, our B, and our C. So our A, pause the video, write out your formula, try it with your formula, and then double check it with the graph. So we have A equals our max minus our min over 2. Our maximum here, the highest value we reach is 3, and the lowest is -3. Don't forget that double negative again. So we have 6 over 2, which gives us 3. Now, because it starts below the midline, it's going to be -3. Step 3, we're going to find B. So we found A, B, and then we're going to find C after this. So what formula do we have that has a B in it? Well, that's our period formula. So the period is 2 pi over B. And what does it mean to find the period? It's the length of one full cycle. So here, we know that cosine, when it's negative cosine, will be 1 C that's been rotated. So go to your graph and trace 1 bell or 1 C. And we trace it, we go up, and then we go back down, and that's the end of 1 full cycle. So here I see there's 2 full cycles that are graphed. So where I end one full cycle is right at pi. So from 0 to pi, we completed one full cycle of cosine. That means our period is equal to pi. So I'm going to put pi in for the period and set it equal to my period formula. Put it over 1, cross multiply. Divide by pi, and I get b equals 2. So now I have A, I have B, and now I need to find C. Pause your video, write out your formula, substitute in, and then verify on the graph. So we've got y equals max plus min, so the midline is the middle, which is the average of your max and min. So my max is 3, my min is negative 3 over 2. And again, 0 divided by 2 gives me 0. So my C is going to be 0. And then again, before we go on to our equation, let's just verify these. Hopefully you already took a look at this, but I'll look at it with you again. So here we've got A is the distance from the highest point, your maximum, to the middle of the curve. So that is going to be up till 3. So my A is going to be 3. Or you could look at the middle to the bottom of your curve, which is negative 3 right here. From the middle to the bottom goes down 3 boxes or 3 units. So we know A is going to be 3. It starts below the midline, so A is negative 3. And then C is our midline, which is the midline right here is at y equals 0. So it tells us C is equal to 0. And lastly, we're going to write out our equation. So subbing in our A, our B, and our C. So A is negative 3. B was 2, and C was 0. So we just have negative 3 cosine 2x. And again, you can put that 2x all in parentheses. Works as well. Okay, we're going to do one more together, and then you guys are going to work on some of these on your own. All right, so first, draw in your midline and decide if this is going to be sine or cosine. Pause the video, do that right now. All right, so you should have had a line drawn in at the middle of this curve, which is at positive 2. Since it starts, and then let's take a look at your y-axis. It starts on the y-axis at the midline, and so we know sine starts at the midline. So we know this is going to be a sine curve, and it starts by going up instead of by going down first. So it's going to be positive sine because it starts at the midline. And you don't have to write this out every time. I'm just doing that for your notes, so to drill it home for you. So we know this is going to be y equals positive A sine bx plus c. Now we're going to find your A, your B, and your C. All right, pause your video and find A. So again, I want to see you guys write out your formula and do it out with your formulas to practice using them, and then also verify it on your graph. So here our maximum is 3 and our minimum is 1. So that gives us 2 over 2, which is 1. And again, A is positive because we start by going up, so we know A is 1. Next, we're going to find B. What's our formula with a B in it? That's the period. So the period equals 2 pi over B. Again, period is how long it takes to complete one full cycle. We need to know what one cycle looks like. So a sine curve, remember, is the rotated S. So we're going to find, and flipped. So we're going to find our S here. And if I trace my curve, I only have half of it. So I need to continue it. So if it's at 2 pi now, if I continue, where would it end over here? and I would double that, so it would be at 4 pi. Or you can look at it over here and say, okay, it goes from negative 2 pi to 2 pi, so that's going to give me 4 pi. 4 pi equals 2 pi over b. Cross multiply, whoops. There we go. Put it over 1 and cross multiply. So we have 4 pi times b equals 2 pi, and divide both sides by 4 pi. Our pi's cancel. 2 over 4 reduces to 1/2. So remember, b is called your frequency, and that tells you how many cycles you see in between 0 and 2 pi. It's always 0 to 2 pi. So we see 1/2 of a cycle, so that's why your b is 1/2. Step 4, we found A, we found B. Now you're going to find C, which is your midline. Pause your video, find C, and then write out your equation. So y for our equation here is equal to the max plus the min. Midline is the middle, so that's the average of your max and your min. Our maximum is at 3, and our minimum is at 1. That's 4 over 2, which is 2. So our midline is y equals 2, which means our C value equals 2, which means we've shifted the whole graph up 2. Remember, the midline tells us we shift everything up 2. And then lastly, hopefully you guys were able to write your equation out. So y equals, our A was positive 1, so you don't have to write that. Our B is positive 1/2 x, and our C is positive 2. So our equation would be sine of 1/2 x plus 2. And again, you can put that 1/2 x in parentheses as well. All right, and that is it for the note section. And then you guys have a classwork that I want you to work on right now. And then you also have a homework assignment after that. So please let me know if you have any questions, and have a great day. Pi out.